Okay, video number 4. Um, it was kind of hard to get this one going. It's been very busy lately, um, between all the things that I'm doing and trying to do the seminary, and it is a lot of time commitment. This week was the third week, and usually I'm a procrastinator, but in this case, I am trying to be ahead. We are going to be on the fourth week, and I needed to read book of Numbers, which I already did. I'm halfway through Deuteronomy, and it's been about a book a week. Genesis, I think, was the longest one, 50 chapters. The other ones are a little bit easier. They're a little, well, I shouldn't say a little easier. They're a little bit shorter. Um, I think Leviticus was the toughest one for me because, going through all the laws and through um, all the um, all the instructions for the Levites. I think I mentioned that book was a little dry, and I wasn't trying to say it in a negative way, but just trying to be realistic. Sometimes when you read a book and then or you read a study material and it's just a lot of stuff um, that you that is not very easy to read. So I think that's what I was implying. This week I was reading Deuteronomy, which is due for next week, so I'm trying to stay ahead. And Deuteronomy was just, I was actually, Deuteronomy was a totally different story. And I think the last 10 chapters that I read was through Dual app. I was listening to it and watching the text as I was walking on the treadmill. And I think I took screenshots of probably 5 or 6 verses. And then when I came home after work, I was trying to find those verses in the Bible, and I think half of them were already highlighted. So I'll share with those verses. I'll share with what God's been talking to me through the Bible. Then we'll talk about one chapter from the book Yesterday, Today, and Forever. A really good book. It's a little bit harder to read. Not as easy as The Messiah, but really good book as well. I'll touch base on one topic from each book and the Bible. So we're going to touch on 3 topics. Yeah, I can't even talk right now. It's 10:17. I still want to read 20 pages for the Messiah book. That is just to catch up with my plan for this week. And like I said, I'm just trying to stay ahead because I'm going to have to read a book review on this. I'm not really looking forward to it. I'm not a writer. And I think it's going to be a 4-page book review that I would have to do in 2 or 3 weeks right after the midterm exam. Looking forward to the exam. Think this is going to be interesting. I'll have to kind of brush up on a few things. And last week when I recorded the video, I think in the beginning I was talking about the second video, how long it was, and that how the third video wasn't going to be the same, or I was going to try not to make it the same. And I think I ended up being 13 seconds apart, which was like an hour and I think 4 minutes or something like that. So this time, before recording the video, I was like, I truly do think this video is going to be shorter. I'm not going to go through all the notes, through all the topics, and I think when I record everything of that great detail, I think it might be a good idea to do that for documenting purposes. But I think for a regular vlog, it might be a little dry, just like the book of Leviticus, right? I can probably lose people. The purpose of this vlog, I guess, to not be really boring, but then at the same time, so let me restart this over. The purpose of the vlog is to talk about what I'm going through, touch base on the topics without killing people with boredom, and maybe like if I'm going to be watching it in the future, I kind of want to watch it as well, and I don't want to fall asleep. So the goal is going to be to maybe take one topic from the book, from both books, right? One topic from each book, one topic from the Bible, kind of talk about the circumstances that were surrounding me for the week, and go from there. I started when I was reading Deuteronomy 6. Like I said, I took like 6 screenshots, and I'm gonna try finding these places because I took them as screenshots on my phone. Um, I'm gonna be honest with you. I kind of did go over the topics that I was gonna talk about the verses that I highlighted, just so I would be more, I guess, more organized and talk about and know about the things that I'm going to talk about, instead of kind of being all over the place and talking about every little detail, everything that I learned, because it's a lot of information, and I'm just going to be choosing one topic, like I said, from the from each, like from Messiah. I think I've read 6 or 7 chapters, and all of them were good. 2 of them were awesome, and I'm just picking one. Same thing with the other book. But let's start with the Bible, Deuteronomy. I was reading Deuteronomy, and I think when I was on the treadmill at work, I listened to 10 chapters. And let's see here. Oh, that Deuteronomy 5:29. Oh, that they had such a heart as this, always to fear me, to keep all my commandments, that it might go well with them and with their descendants forever. Now, when I was reading it, I think the app had a background music, and for some reason, like, I felt like these chapters that Moses was writing right before Israel was going into the promised land, and God was telling them, here's what I prepared for you. I'm going to go ahead of you. You have to do this. You have to do that. It's more of a like, I don't know if a battle shout would be a good, not probably a battle shout, but in Russian I would say nastavlение, right? It's, what's the English version of that? It's guidance, right? He's trying to guide them through this, showing, and I saw so much love in what God was telling the Israelites through Moses. It really inspired me. I was highlighting a lot of stuff, and a lot of that stuff highlighted was already highlighted in my Bible. Let's see, now is the commandment. Be careful to do them, to keep all the statutes. You shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. One of the verses that I've read was Deuteronomy 6:18. And I thought that would be a good, not the slogan, but what do you call those things, like for business, right? Motto, right? A good motto for your business if you're a Christian. And you shall do, in Deuteronomy 6:16, God is talking to the Israelites. You shall not put the Lord your God to test, as you tested him at Massah. You shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his testimonies and his statutes, which he has commanded you. And you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you. And I thought, you know what, that would be a good business model for Christian people in business. You shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you. And I think a lot of it, the world takes a lot from the Bible, right? So the world would call this karma. Whatever you do is going to come back to you, right? You get what you, not you get what you pay for, but whatever you're going to do is going to come back to you. Karma, we call it, people in the world call it karma. Well, it's actually in the Bible, and that caught my attention, so I highlighted that. Then it talks about chapter 7. That was really cool. When God was talking to the Israelites, talking about how they are the chosen people, not because they were the greatest, they were the mightiest, or they were the most obedient. It's because God chose them. For you are the people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession. Out of all the people who are on the face of the earth, it was not because you are more in number, than any other people, that the Lord set his love on you and chose you. For you were the fewest of all people, but it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then, let's see here, that he making this. Oh, and then I also highlighted that chapter 8, verse 3, and he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. I believe that that's what Jesus mentioned in the New Testament when Satan was offering him bread, saying, hey, turn these rocks into bread. I do believe that God was referring to this verse in Deuteronomy. I'll have to double check that, but that was just kind of the click that I had in my head. I'm like, oh, I think that's what Jesus was referring to. Beware, another one that I took a screenshot of, but the one that was already highlighted. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth. And I think in this case, it's not just the wealth. I think it can be applied to everything. When it's really hard for us in life, as a Christian, we easily find ourselves on our knees and praying and living the Christian life. But I think it's harder for us, for majority of us, to thank God and be in that thankful attitude when things are going well. I mean, when we're blessed with everything, when we have health, when we have wealth, health, when everything is good, we tend to forget that whatever we have was giving us to us by our God, and that's exactly what Moses is talking about here. The Lord, another one that I highlighted, and I wanted to kind of touch base on this a little bit. In chapter 10, verse 10, Deuteronomy 10:10, I myself stayed on the mountain as at the first time, 40 days and 40 nights, and the Lord listened to me that time also. The Lord was unwilling to destroy you. That's interesting because when I read that the Lord was willing to destroy you, the moment that I remember was God wanted to destroy them, but Moses was telling him, well, if you're gonna destroy them, take my name out of the book, right? And I think that's because I just looked it up. I think it was talking about the book, like take my name out of that book. And what book was Moses talking about? So I started doing a little research about that. And actually, I did it 2 weeks ago. So I'm gonna try to remember that and try to get my thoughts together and what do you say? And see, this is the perfect way for me to practice my oral skills, because sometimes I think I know what I want to say, but I can't put it together. And sometimes I think I know what I want to say, but I don't. Sometimes I blame it on English because English is my second language, but then I'm like, okay, well, how would you say it in Russian? And it's like, oh, well, I can't really say it in Russian either. In the knowledgeable way, right? So I want to put these things together in a knowledgeable answer. So what book was Moses talking about when he was saying to cross me out from that book? Because we read about the books in Revelation, right? And one of the first books that we think about is the Book of Life. In the Book of Life, I think we read about the Book of Life in the New Testament about 6 or 7 times. I don't believe that there is a mention of a Book of Life in the Old Testament. There is a mention of a Book of Living. I think in the 60th, 68th or 69th Psalm, David talks about the Book of the Living, and it talks about the actual life here. So I think he was praying for crossing his enemies out from the Book of Living, meaning that to kill them. So when I thought about that situation, I thought, well, what book was Moses talking about? I do believe that Moses was talking about the book of living, not the book of life, because when God told him, I'm gonna destroy all the Israel and get the nation from you first, God was never going to do that because he had a covenant with Abraham, and God always fulfills his promises. I truly do believe that it was a test for Moses to see what Moses was going to say. And here we read that God, the Lord was unwilling to destroy you. He gave a covenant, and God never fails on his promises. He never fails on his covenants. And when Moses was talking about the book, taking his name out from the book I don't think it mentions the book, but from the book, I do think that it was from the book of life, because then we have to decide. Well, what do you think did Moses love Israel more than God? Would he say? So we have two options, right? Moses would be saying, take me out from the book of living if you're going to kill Israelites, right? If you're going to kill them, then kill me, because I don't want to go through this if I'm going to see them getting killed or suffered. Or the other option is, well, if they're not going to be in heaven with you, if their names are not going to be in the book of life, take my name out from that book. So in a sense, saying how, well, if there are none of them going to be with you, I don't want to be with you, which doesn't really make sense when you think about it. Why? I don't think Moses loved God more than anything else, more than the nation of Israel. So I truly don't think that it makes sense for Moses to say, hey, if none of them going to be with you in heaven, I don't want to be with you in heaven. I think when Moses was talking about, he was talking about, well, if you're going to destroy them, kill me as well, so I don't have to see the aftermath of that. And then here, and then where I think it was written in Exodus, and then what we read here, it actually talks about the Lord was unwilling to destroy you. So the Lord was willing to destroy you. So it kind of contradicts what was written in Exodus, but I think if we put everything together, it makes sense if we put everything in the context. What does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all of your soul? No one shall be able to stand against you. There are a couple more spots, but I think those were when I was listening to that, I was picturing Moses standing in front of the congregation with the promised land, not too far from the Jordan, probably where you could see the promised land. And I think Moses was pleading God to give him the opportunity to go to the promised land. But I don't know, when I was just listening to that, I was picturing Moses talking to the Israelites not too far from the Jordan, where they could see that, and God was saying, if you follow me, if you're gonna obey my commandments, I'm gonna go in front of you. I'm gonna go fight for you, and you're just gonna follow me through the land and take possession of it. I think it was really inspiring, and I think Israelites were realizing that Moses is not going to go with them. Now they're going to have another leader. Moses was with them for more than 40 years, and now Moses' time was over. So I think it was one of those bittersweet moments when Moses was passing his leadership, and the Israelites were excited to leave the Pustinia, to leave the desert, and finally cross Jordan to go into the promised land. Then I read the book of Messiah, the Messiah revealed, rejected, and received. And what the chapter I wanted to talk about was, that kind of caught my attention, which was pretty interesting. Oh, let's see here. Oh, the messianic ideas in the Messiah. It talks about the four major philosophies at the time when Jesus was here on earth. It was Pharisees, Sadducees. Those are the main ones that we remember, right? Pharisees are, the most popular guys. Sadducees, we kind of read in the New Testament about Sadducees, and we're like, oh, I guess they didn't really believe in resurrection, and then they weren't really Pharisees, but I don't know what the difference was besides them not believing in angels and resurrection. And then there were zealots. Zealots were, I always thought that zealots were people from a specific geographic region. And then it was talking about other branch, Essence. Essenes? I don't know. I'm going to show you this. I don't know how to pronounce this. This is not an audio book. I'm just reading it. I know how to pronounce Pharisees and Sadducees, but Essenes, we'll talk about them as well. So 4 groups: Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots. And I'm going to be reading the majority of this to save time. Also Josephus. I think in one of the videos I said, well, Josephus was, I mentioned Josephus, and I'm like, oh, it was one of the philosophers. I think that's what I mentioned in the video, but Josephus was a Christian historian in the 1st century. That's why a lot of historical writings that Josephus wrote, we kind of use that to, like, we have a New Testament, but we also have some historical records for the 1st century, and we use Josephus, and we meaning Christians, we use the writings of Josephus because he was the historian of that 1st century for us to better to understand the atmosphere of that 1st century Christians. So there were 4 major philosophies. Pharisees. Pharisees, like many of these groups, arose in the 2nd century before Christ, so fairly new group before Christ. It was right in the period before the Old Testament and the New Testament, the 400 years of silence, I think it's called, the 2nd century BC, who opposed the Hellenistic tendencies, which were the Greek way of things. They were also custodians of the oral law, and placed great emphasis on traditions. Their vision of Israel's future deliverer could be described as something of a military Messiah. So right now, well, in the 1st century, Jewish people were in the Roman Empire. So the Messiah that they were picturing is that was going to rise, unite all the Jews, and go against Rome and make Israel separate from the Roman Empire. Since Josephus tells us that the Pharisees had the favor of the common people more than any other group, it can safely be affirmed that Pharisees' model of the Messiah was probably held widely among 1st century Jews. The Pharisees opposed Jesus for his rejection of the oral law. And the oral law what is the oral law? It was, there were custodians of the oral law, which they believed had been delivered at Sinai and passed down orally through the ages. So it was something that was in the oral form at Sinai, and I believe Sinai was the Israel being in the desert was about 1000 BC. So 800 years before we got Pharisees, they're referring to this law, the oral law, that was initiated at the Mountain Sinai, that was passed down orally for the last 800 years, and they truly believed in the whatever was in that oral law. I don't know if we have it still today. I don't know if the oral law was ever written, but there was something in the in the oral format that they really believed, and that Jesus opposed. In the later chapter, we'll examine a little more closely this group. Sadducees. The Sadducees were bitter rivals of the Pharisees, putting a greater emphasis on the written law only, the Torah, 5 books, compromise of the 5 books of Moses. Oh man. They disagreed with the Pharisaic emphasis on their oral law, so they did not believe in that oral law. Sadducees also did not believe in angels or resurrection. They tended to be from the wealthier strata of society and were often members of the priestly families. They controlled the temple ritual and the leadership of the Sanhedrin. Today we have no writings that they produced. It is probably because they had no messianic doctrine at all. Since Rome, and here's pretty interesting part that I found out about Sadducees. Since Rome granted the Sadducees a privileged position as leaders in the temple and Sanhedrin, any notion of messianic deliverer who would defeat the Romans would have posed a threat to their own privileged position. So Roman Empire told Sadducees, hey guys, you're in charge of this. We're going to place you in these positions. We're not going to bother you. You do your thing. Let us do our thing, right? So Sadducees did not want a Messiah because they were in their place because Roman Empire put them there. So they didn't necessarily want freedom from the Roman Empire because they were benefiting from that. Caiaphas, a Sadducee and the high priest, expressed this concern in John 11, 47 through 50. We read, so the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, I don't know why I was just reading it like this. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, Sadducee, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. The Sadducees had a vested interest in keeping things the way they were. They were supporters of the status quo, a situation they enjoyed under the Roman rules who allowed them to control the temple service and business. If a popular Messiah like Jesus stirred up the people, then they might eventually lose their privileged position. Unfortunately, we have people today that would rather do certain things that benefit them or benefit their culture or benefit something else instead of sticking with the Word of God and going with what the Bible is saying. Essenes, I don't know how else to pronounce it, but it was an ascetic group who withdrew to the wilderness and rejected the corrupt temple leadership. They awaited the final judgment in which their enemies would be destroyed. Most scholars believe that settlement of Qumran, which produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, was a group of Essenes. Some of those writings reveal that Essenes had a rather detailed and fascinating concept of Messiah, prophet, priest, and the king. However, their issue was that they thought the prophet, the priest, and the king were going to be 3 separate entities. The place where they were wrong at is actually that Jesus was going to be the prophet, the priest, and the king. So they had a big zeal. They were saying how, Pharisees and Sadducees, whatever they're doing is not right. So we're going to leave this world and we're going to live a different lifestyle and we're going to keep the true faith. That's how I picture them. The Zealots, this was kind of interesting as well. Zealots, they were not so a religious sect as a group of freedom fighters, right? We talked about how Israel was under the Roman Empire. So these guys were saying, well, we're the chosen nation. Why are we under the Roman Empire? We gotta fight these guys. They're the bad guys. They strongly resisted Roman occupation and often attacked Roman soldiers and Jewish collaborators in guerrilla-type operations. And it may be difficult to establish that the Zealots were an official organized group going by that name early in the 1st century. Their philosophy of zeal for the God of Israel manifested in hatred for Rome. Uh, in hatred for Rome was really real indeed and present in many during that time. The founder of the Zealots, Judas of Gamla, was a Pharisee, so the messianic concept of Zealots were undoubtedly also along the lines of military messiah. I think it talks about how Simon Zealot was, before he met Jesus, he was one of those guys saying, we got to get rid of Romans. We are the chosen nation. I don't know what Romans are doing here, and they were fighting them in that guerrilla type warfare. They believed that Messiah would come primarily to deliver Israel from her hated enemies. Zealots, however, added a different twist to this scenario. The Pharisees were willing to wait for God. This is important. The Pharisees were willing to wait for God to intervene in human history in his own time. The Zealots, however, were quite zealous to hasten the Messiah's coming by their own military efforts. They thought that they could speed up the Messiah's coming by killing some Romans right now. The two who were crucified with Jesus undoubtedly in sympathy with zealot ideas. It talks about Barabbas because it says in Luke, in the 23rd chapter, he released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder. And what this book is saying that Barabbas and probably those two sinners that were crucified with Jesus, there were probably zealots as well, because Romans were catching those guys. And in case of Barabbas, he was in prison for insurrection, right? He was against the regime. That is not a Bible doctrine. That's something that the history, like that's something that we think about by reading those historical books and trying to understand the time and trying to understand the context that the New Testament was written in, and paying attention to those little words, right? A lot of times we just read things through without paying attention to it. But when you start putting yourself in that time frame, when you're trying to learn what the atmosphere was like during those times, the Bible kind of opens up in a totally different way. A generation later, the actions of these hotheads, the book calls, precipitated the war with Rome and the subsequent fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. We should not assume that all the Jewish people of Jesus fit neatly into one of these four sects. The vast majority of the common people had no clearly defined messianic concept, although most were probably influenced to a degree by Pharisees. When two disciples were going to Emmaus, and when Jesus was with them, they did say something along those lines. But we had hoped that he was the one that they were picturing as the Messiah, that was going to be a military leader to go against the Romans and establish Israel as its own sovereign country. So according to that, the book is saying that the Israel as a nation was probably not divided into these four categories of people that we just talked about: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and Zealots. Some were probably in between, but probably the thought about the Messiah was closer to Pharisees, because they were hoping for a military leader that was going to save them from the Romans. Let's see here. To people under the yoke of foreign oppressors, the idea of a royal Messiah who would bash the heads of the oppressors had a great appeal. Let's see here. God, the beginning of Moses. So, and then it talks about the road to Emmaus when it says, "Oh foolish one," when Jesus says, "Oh foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" This is the hard truth for many Jewish people, both then and now, to comprehend. Jews have always looked for a Messiah who stresses a role of kingship and rule, not one of humility and suffering that we read about in Isaiah 53. So that was from the book of Messiah. It was a little bit longer than I thought. I talked a little bit longer than I thought I was going to, but that's almost always the case. This should be a little bit shorter. We're at the 35-minute mark. Let's get this done. I read about the flood, and then it talked about Noah, and what I really want to talk about was the Babylon, the Tower of Babel, and I guess it's not Babylon, it's Tower of Babel. And something that I found out for myself that I was like, I never thought about it in this way. So the story of the flood, I read about the story, and the first story narrated after the flood demonstrates its insufficiency to rid human beings of their sin nature. Water could not wash it away. Water could not wash that sin away. So it had a bunch of sinful people, and God was performing this surgery by the flood. He saved Noah, and then we see how in that first generation with Noah's sons, we see that sin just continuing on. And then it says that in Genesis 8:21, God says, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood." People are not generally good as we think they are, as we say we are in this culture, right? Inherently good. People not inherently good. They're inherently evil. That is why, let's see here, and then it talks about Noah, and it talks about the Noah's son Ham uncovering his father's nakedness, which is more than just seeing him naked. If you're interested in that, you can buy this book and read about it. And then it talks about the Tower of Babel, And let's read. I highlighted a lot of stuff. So we're just going to do the highlighted stuff, and we're going to finish up. The Tower of Babel represents an attempt by the post-flood culture to become completely independent of God. That was the whole purpose. An entire civilization rebels against the Creator. Building a city is not sinful. Building a tower is not sinful. A tower that reaches to the heavens, however, is not simply a high tower. I remember reading in the Bible before, like, oh, we're going to build a tower, and all of a sudden God said, no, you can't build that tower. We knew it was going to be a tall tower, but I never really understood why it was such a big deal. So again, building a city is not sinful, nor building a high tower is not sinful. A tower that reaches to the heavens, however, is not simply a high tower. That tower represents a concerted effort to gain control over their environment and circumstances. After the flood, the human race was recommissioned to rule planet Earth in the name of the Lord. These people, however, were determined to rule in their own name. That is, they would create a self-sufficient society and get rid of the role of God. It has been said that in the last 30 years, scientists have discovered more than all previous history combined. The Tower of Babel generation was inherently bright as our own. That was an interesting concept because I remember seeing that graph, how bright Adam was, how their brain worked, and they were like really really smart, and then it kind of reset, and now we're like going way up again. So the generation of that lived during the Tower of Babel, they're really really bright people. A lot of times I think, and I'm talking from my own experience, we picture the old ages as, you know, black and white. People were dumb. They were just walking around in these, and everything was black and white. There's some smart people out there. There are probably a lot of them were probably smarter than us. And the book talks about that generation of Babel was a smart generation. All they lacked was the foundation upon which to build. And I was like, huh, what is it talking about? All they lacked was the foundation upon which to be built. They were determined to establish this. They were determined to establish the foundation. If the Lord had not intervened within a relatively short period of time, they would have been in a position to acquire the kind of technology we possess today. Okay, so I'm like, okay, so the Tower of Babel, what the book is saying, that they were getting close to get to this progressive age that started in 1900s, where we started, you know, getting all the ore from the earth, and then we got oil and gas, and then we got computers and all this technology. Um, if the Lord had not intervened within a relatively short period of time, they would have been in the position to acquire the kind of technology we possess today. The big difference, however, is they had a united purpose. There were no language barriers. There were no rivalries. In short, they could devote their entire resources to the achievement of their purposes. Genetic engineering, space travel, nuclear energy, all these things which can be put to good use can also be instruments of evil. Technology is not evil, the human heart is. The Tower of Babel generation, alienated from God, stood on the threshold of a brave new world. Something that we're talking about today. He steps in effect, retards the acceleration of technology. The language barriers result in a lack of a cooperation and the disintegration of the one world government. Tower of Babel episode. This is an interesting fact. So basically what the book is saying, people back then were smart, right? So what we started figuring out in 1900s, those guys could have probably figured it out back then. And back then, they were all on the same page. In the 1800s, 1900s, we had different countries, different languages. We had wars because we didn't like each other, right? Back then, everybody was on the same page. They had one language, and they had this purpose. Hey, let's build a name for ourselves. Let's be independent from God. So back then, they could have easily gotten to the point and and gotten this technology that we have today, which could have happened, what, 4,000 years ago or so, if God didn't intervene. Tower of Babel episode will have a sequel. This is interesting. We'll have a sequel at the end of the age, before the Christ returns to establish his kingdom on earth. Revelation 13 symbolically portrays a one world government headed up by Antichrist to achieve what the Tower of Babel generation sought. He will claim to be God and will totally dominate the economic and political resources of the earth. And then it talks about the fallenness of humanity. Let's see here. Sinful human begins natural tend towards autonomy. Oh, let's see here. Oh, and then it talks about politics. You know, I always thought about politics in a negative light. And then here it just talks about how sinful human beings naturally tend towards autonomy, being independent of authority. Politics wrestles with the demanding task of preserving a balance between individual freedom and collective welfare. So politics in its own is not a bad thing. It tries to develop that balance between individual freedom and collective warfare. What's good for everybody? Achieving a balance has proven to be one of the most difficult political problems in the history. The responsible exercise of powers requires theological resources. The task is beyond the capabilities of mere human wisdom. We can't do it on our own. The generation of the Tower of Babel, by excluding God's revelation from consideration, condemned themselves to failure. Any government that follows suit will eventually become oppressed and self-destruct. The Tower of Babel also casts a long shadow into the future. The rebellious intent to create a self-sufficient society anticipates another day when the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. This rebellion, led by Antichrist, culminates human history and thankfully climaxes in the return of the rightful King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That was it. Pretty interesting thing, because before, the Tower of Babel was just a tower for me. Well, people just wanted to build a tower, but the true meaning behind it, they wanted to be independent from God. Just like Eve in the Garden of Eden, she really liked the fruit, and she really liked what the serpent was saying, like, you're going to be just like God. Those people, the generation of that lived during the Tower of Babel, that's exactly what they wanted to do, and that was really eye-opening. And at first I was like, is it really that they could have gotten to the point that where we are at today? And the answer right after that was pretty much like, why not? Why did we get to this progress recently, and why they couldn't? They were not dumber than us. Most of them were probably smarter than us. So that was really interesting. It's interesting to see that line from what they were trying to do in the past and what we're heading into. We're heading into, closer to the world, one world government, where we're all going to unite and we're going to try to be independent from God, and the leader is going to be Antichrist. Hopefully we'll be taken from the earth by that time. I do not want to be seeing that kind of unity or leadership, and it's something that I always remind myself, like, it's not something that we should be worrying about. God will take care of us. Sometimes we concentrate on things that, oh well, did you hear, they're passing this law here, or they're passing that law there. Recently I saw somewhere that Amazon, you can pay for things in is it Amazon or whatever the food store they own, the wholesale. See, I don't shop often. Whatever the store Amazon owns, right? You can walk through it and pay for it with the palm of your hand. Well, if you're a true Christian, you know that God is in control. God's going to take care of that. We shouldn't be worried about things that we cannot control. We know the person. We know who's in control, and I think we should stop getting all nervous and anxious about what the things that are going to happen. We know what's going to happen at the end, and we're going to be part of it. So why would we worry about these little things that these little roadblocks? If we see the final picture, we shouldn't be really caring about this little thing. So that's what I've been kind of thinking about recently, and I still need to read 20 pages not to catch up, but to stay ahead, because I really do want to stay ahead. I am getting a little busier on the business side. I am working at the firehouse tomorrow. I'm working on my office as well. We're doing a office remodel, but a lot of times I think, well, I just don't have time. But I come back to the conclusion that I don't have time is a pretty relative statement, because you always have time for what's important. If something happens and it needs to be done right now, you always find time for it. So my goal is to stay on track. We're going to be halfway through Old Testament, the first part, the first half, at the end of this week. I'm really looking forward to continue on. It's not easy, um, but I do feel God's blessings, and I'm just thankful to God that He's working on my heart, that I'm not just a nominal Christian that goes to church and just sits through it and does all the Christian things, but something I think the biggest thing that I'm thankful to God for is putting this want of me reading the Bible and knowing God more. And I think every Christian should have that. I obviously, in my 36 years, I was not always that Christian, but I'm thankful to God that um, I do have God put that in my heart, and I hope that with God's help, not of my own help, not of my own diligence by, reading the Bible every day for the check mark, but truly um, having that um, having that want, a genuine want to read the Bible every day. And I remember before I would read the Bible 2 or 3 chapters when I was a good Christian, right? Most of the time, or just come into church and listen to Word every Sunday. But at this point of my life, in the last year, I would say, I've gotten to reading the Bible. I wouldn't say so much, but reading the Bible on a regular basis, that I do feel off when I don't read it for a day or two. And I'm thankful to God for such a feeling that God puts it into my heart that whenever I don't read the Bible, I feel off. Like, hey, something is wrong. I need to read it more. And I hope it's just gonna multiply. I hope I'm gonna have more time for it. And I think that's pretty much it. So not quite the 30 minutes I was hoping for, 51. It is a progress, so 10 minutes less. Um, and yeah, thank you. And well, let's see what the next week brings.